if you look at Neptune, well, usually there's no Pluto aspects coming in during this time. There's Neptune. Neptune in 68, but you would have started to almost sense it. I think it was already starting to show, even though that's 2 degrees, just a 1 degree orb. If I went 2 degrees, it would be through all of 68 and 69. It hit my IC. It was confusing. What's my motivation? What's happening? It was the need for mystical motivation, or it's opposing my motive and the disassociation with being out in the world. That's there. And it's there. It was there end of 68 into 69. It was there at the end of 69. And then it went and conjuncted my Venus through 70, conjuncts IC and conjuncts Venus, and then went and squared my descendant. So Neptune was highly active from that point on. I'm 67. I'm just about to go into the Neptune factors with all the Saturn factors. No Uranus, no sudden shocks, no Uranus, no Pluto, until Uranus doesn't come up to 72, 73. Okay, so we've got our time factors. We've got the Saturn cycle. We got the Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Saturn major aspects to the personal planets, and you're seeing 67. What are you going to advise? If I was in Montreal, if I'm staying there, what am I going to do? I'm not working. I don't have a job. What am I going to get? Doesn't look like you'd probably be saying with the Saturn opposition. It's like bide your time. Bide your time doing what? I had nothing. It's like, or you do some retraining, you regroup, you try to go back to school, you try and retrain or do something. And I already felt the school, traditional schooling wasn't what I'd already learned, was self-taught by experience, and I'd let go of it. So like I wasn't, but that's what you would be tending to think. It needs to go back to school and regroup or whatever. But things were not getting easier. So from my viewpoint, all these responsibilities were starting to cave in on me and come in on me. And I didn't want to get stuck with those problems happening again at home or where I grew up from, because I know how that played out. So I worked for a couple months at the World's Fair, just in a hot dog stand. But it made enough money to get me to pay for the boat fare to go across to England. So that was, you don't see it here, but it was already the beginning of, I don't fit in here, I don't know where I'm going, but I can't stay where I'm going, I can't stay here, I'm moving away. So I moved away. Now, I'm traveling and these things are going to happen. I'm not going to be getting much support either. But what happened is I went to India and I ran immediately in January. By January, I went across. I left England with I think I left England with $100. Got to Turkey with about $30 left. I got to India with 50 cents left in my pocket. I walked across the border in India, and within the first day, within the first few hours, I ran across someone who had just spent time being alone and meditating. And he took me in, and I started going to this time of being alone. So he set me up, and this was the beginning of my 2 years meditating in these rooms. They were rooms, but they were a bathroom and the facilities. But you're meant to be alone like a cave where you don't see anyone. You're just supposed to be meditating and chanting, and you're not distracted by anything. So I pulled away right from the world, and I bided my time. I sat there for 2 years of the Saturn. We've gone through, I talked about this at different times, but I went first in January, I went for about 11 days, and I knew, oh, this is something. I felt something different. I had to go further. So they sent me down to the guru and said to me in March, I went back into these rooms again, this room again, and I went into this room and I spent three months in there till June. And in that 3 months, I went from about 130 down to about 65, 70 pounds, and I was really skin and bone, but I felt great because I worked on something spiritually. I had regained some inner perspective, but I knew I had to go deeper. So I'm talking this out because these are things you wouldn't know about. We're just in this chart, so I wanted to present the drama around doing consultations at different times. But then I went into this room again, and this time was when I was in for 3 months, and the Saturn opposed the Sun, and I lost a lot of weight. So that was from end of March, April, May, June. I came out for a month or so. They said I had to stay out for a month to put some weight on, but newspaper people came and found out about me, and they were wondering, what am I doing here? What's a Canadian doing in India doing this thing? So then there was a big fuss made of it, and so they Guru sent me down to South India to another place. And I went into that room in July or in the end of June. And I spent 13 months, the whole year till the next July, in that room being alone, just meditating. And that whole 13 months, that was the whole Neptune on my IC. So questioning the purpose of my existence, what am I doing? It really was a mystical thing, dissolving everything. I was really living in the Neptune cycle, but I wasn't going anywhere in the world. I was really isolated. Like, it was a discipline. It was not easy to you're supposed to be chanting and being busy all the time. So that was an inner work. But in one way, so going into a room being alone is like being solitary confinement. You're as far away from being responsible in life as you could. I felt I had problems inside of me until I worked them out inwardly. There's no sense going out. So this was my work, chanting, and then eventually the visions were coming in. The visions didn't really come. They was more just dissolving the old sense of who I was. And so I went back forward, and there was health issues that came up, and did I go out or don't I? And I decided I wouldn't. I'd stay in, even though it was potentially life-threatening, but it healed itself when I got out. I came out in July of '69. On the same day Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon, that was the day I came out of the 13 months being alone. And it's funny, I always thought it's funny because Neil Armstrong's my brother's name, not the same person as the astronaut, but there was sort of similar poetries around that. So I came out, I went around India for about a month. It was really disoriented, and then I realized something was missing, and I had to go back in again. So this was in this in-between phase of Neptune. I went back into the room. I went in and I spent another 55 days in there, and that 55 days was in September and October. Saturn was square Saturn was supposed to, but it wasn't as intense as before. But Neptune was conjuncting the IC. So in this time period, I had great visions. My insight opened up. I had all these visions about astrology, about music, about things. I didn't even know they were. I didn't sleep for 55 days. I was in this room. I could lie down, but I'd be wide awake. My mind was just going off. So this was happening with the Neptune Odyssey. You'd never predict this, and never in the mind may even imagine this. You'd know there's some mystical thing going on with Neptune through the IC, but you wouldn't know exactly what it is. You might suggest maybe you could be in an ashram, you go someplace where you're in a retreat and you're trying to develop some prayers, some inner skills because of the Neptune. By the Saturn zone, you wouldn't necessarily think that. But I came out of the room. What did I want? I didn't want to be alone. I had a vision. I wanted to be in the world. I felt there was a place in the world. I came out with this vision I'm going to live for. I'm really pumped up in my vision. And then the vision went over, Neptune went over with my Venus. And I came back to Canada in November, late November of '69. I spent 6 months paying off the debt, working in a print shop, paying off the debt for the airfare. But still, I'm inspired. I'm having my visions and things during that time. I'm pumping myself. I'm now away in relationships because I'm still pumped from India. Then the Neptune went over my IC again in 1970, and as it did, I met the woman who was going to be my first wife. And by the time the end of the year came, Neptune's on my Venus, and I go and get married. So I'm making the dream real. My woman's there, person's there, married, we're there, and I was just charismatically in there. I still didn't have the job. The other things weren't exactly there, but I had the vision of astrology, and I was working towards astrology, and it came in. So, but like looking back, I think, oh, that was a long shot. But in a way, that was the special connection. And then Neptune went on for another year. The relationship lasted, and then it went into '71. In '72, Neptune squared the ascendant, and the relationship fell apart. My son was born in the middle of that, and the relationship fell apart. We got separated. I was separated from my son for 5 years. So I had a lot of sorrow coming in around relationships because I was going on my vision of it, not the reality of it. But so this is the story of the Neptune through this. When I looked at Uranus, it was as it hit Uranus, squared the moon, I had to let go of my past, break the relationship, broke, I'm having to start again. And then Uranus conjuncted my son, and really my career became a little more famous. I got some media attention, and some of my predictions came out really right, and I got a lot of kind of fame as Uranus conjuncted my son. That was really the starting of it. So this was my period, but this period of being alone and not fitting in, that was a Saturn opposition to the sun. You'd never imagine in '67 to do that, to advise someone to do that. But the Neptune might have said, well, maybe you might think the spiritual thing it's still opposed, that conjunct the IC was opposing the midheaven, so I never been further away from integrated in the world as when I was just alone there. Okay, so that's my 8-year graph. So I'm filling it in with information, but just to show the puzzles around this. You can get the same thing in the transits. Like if you go into the search section of Matrix and you select the transits and you just select the outer planets, Saturn and Pluto, and you make conjunctions and squares to the inner planets and the angles, it'll give you this printout of when these aspects were exactly. So you have the general theme from the 8-year graph. That's enough to work with. But when you're talking to someone, you're involved in something, they're going on with things. They have their agenda for what's happening this week, next month, whatever. It's important. Then you can use these dates as they become needed. A lot of times you don't have to get to them because you're dealing with the issue and it just goes right to it. But it's good to have the preparation of having the exact dates of each aspect. So in this one, it's just all the exact dates. I didn't put the applying. I find the applying and separating the entering and leaving the 1 degree is too complicated an issue. It's easier for me to get the exact point and allow for a bit of time before, a bit of time after for each planet. Okay. So we've done that. That's the transits. So like then it takes some time in the natal chart, seeing the person, so that like for me it was learning knowledge. I'm pumped with this inner experiences I want to talk about. I mean nothing to anybody else, but I was pumped on it. Got me into astrology. It mixed the mysticism with the astrology, and the visions came in the music, and it's like I fell into these visions. I've been living these visions for 50 years. I'm still pumped up from those visions in those days. It was the most disassociative, insignificant time of my life yet. It was the most personally valid experience I ever had. If I'd have stayed in Montreal, I would have just ended up on the streets probably, driving with better habit, worse habits. So for me, actually leaving was not a bad thing. But in my chart, my Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, 3rd house. If you run into a problem, well, I'll travel, I'll move somewhere else, I'll do something else. That was instinctive lineage. So when things got bad, Saturn, Pluto, I would move. I would go somewhere different. Why stick around mean or bad or difficult things? So that was there more than it was to get strong and deal with these pressures. Okay, that came later, that developed later as I got my astrology and was working and teaching it. I had to do all the work to maintain the school and maintain the teachings and writing and the career. And then there was a lot of work. There were confrontations too, but it's still, that's where it became, the Jupiter started getting wise and started working with Saturn to guide my Mars. But this was all Saturn going through the 8th house, opposing my Sun, and coming up on and Neptune on my IC. So those were two things that were predominant in those times. I'm just about to go into them, and at the same time, my progressed Moon was coming up around to go to oppose the Sun too. It was in that 8th house as well. Okay.